The Holy Gospel, as it is recorded in the book of Matthew, the 48th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And look, there was a great earthquake, for a messenger of God descending from heaven came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. Its appearance was like lightning, and its clothing white as snow. For fear of the messenger, the guards shook and were as though dead. But the messenger responded to the women and said, "Fear not. I know that you all are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and see, he is on to Galilee ahead of you. There you will see him." This is my message for you. So the women left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to tell the disciples the news. Then, all of a sudden, Jesus met them and said, "Shalom." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and bowed down, worshiping him. Then Jesus said to them, "Fear not, go and tell my sisters and brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." The word of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Takes 10 verses and is best experienced by listening to it chanted by our own Steve Whiting using Wilda Gafney's translation. And it's worth noting that Matthew's version includes an earthquake and the dawning statement of the centurion. What did he say again? Truly, this is the Son of God. Mark's Easter story, of course, is shorter, just 8 verses, ending with the women going home afraid and saying nothing to anyone, unless you have the long-playing version of Mark. And Luke's account is the longest, in keeping with Luke's Dostoevsky style of writing. Here now, Luke's telling. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again." Then they remembered. They remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now, it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Peter got up and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. And it is this question in verse 5 of Luke's gospel that I want to unpack today. Why do we look for the living among the dead? A rhetorical question? Maybe. Except that we do this all the time. Why do we look for the living among the dead? The shorter answer is we do it in 3 ways. We do it in unhealthy ways, we do it in healing ways, and we do it in heroic ways. Looking for the living among the dead. As I work through a few examples, I want you to think about which examples are unhealthy, which are healing, and which are heroic. Unhealthy, healing, heroic. How often, when a new way of life is suggested, do we internally or perhaps externally and loudly object to letting go of the things we are used to, whether they bring us life or not? The things we are accustomed to, the patterns that we have. I have 8 coffee mugs. I use the same 2 consistently, but keep the other 6 because I like what they say or how they are painted, or because I have 8 hooks to hang cups on. Hers go in the cupboard. How much do we cling to these things saying, okay, we will have new life, but we want the old life too. In other words, we're looking for the living among the dead. You might say that old life, old patterns, old things we collect fit like an old pair of worn jeans. They're safer and easier, and we know where they go because we hung the hooks. In the words of Cat Stevens, pondering those old jeans and the patches make the goodbye harder still. A friend tells me she has this exact pair of jeans. When she first puts them on after they are washed, she says, they fit great. She loves them. But over the years, they've developed a hole in the knee that gets worse with each wear. And she is beyond the stage of life where the holes in her jeans look sexy. Yet she cannot get rid of them. As she wears them throughout the day, they stretch out and start falling off. She grabs the top of them and pulls them up time and time again. When she's in the store, she has to do this while her back is literally up against a wall so nobody sees. And ultimately, she abandons them for something else mid-afternoon, puts them in the wash, rinse, repeat, literally. And between wearing them, she convinces herself yet again that she has this great pair of jeans. And when they come out of the dryer, she's excited to put them on. And then her toe gets stuck in the hole on the way down. It rips the hole wider, and 2 hours later, they start to sag. She takes them off, throws them in the wash. Wash, rinse, and repeat. She thinks about how she can repair them, but the truth is the jeans just need to go. They need to be thrown out. They are threadbare. She needs a new pair of jeans, yet she keeps looking for the living, perhaps the body she once had, the time she got those jeans. She looks for the living among the dead. She was finally able to throw the jeans out when she put them on, and her daughter says, whether you like them or whether you don't, they're horribly out of style and flatter you not at all. Oh, now it's easy to put the dead jeans in the cemetery. I want to thank all those who contributed these beautiful flowers and plants to adorn our sanctuary today. I think about how, in light of the dire warnings about climate change, we have been advised not to mow dandelions anymore. And I imagine if this was filled with dandelions, how much we would prefer the dead to not have dandelions in our sanctuary, even if some think it is helpful. It's hard to keep track of all this. In May, Ann Arbor is proclaiming No Mow May, meaning we are not to mow our lawns for the entire month of May, and for good reason. Both not mowing the lawn and leaving the dandelions is better for the earth. It's better for the environment. And in case you didn't get the memo, we have an environmental crisis going on that we all can choose to help by little things like this. And you don't have to put a sign on your lawn that says, my lawn is really long and my dandelions are here because it's the right thing to do, because that doesn't tend to encourage others to follow suit. Why do we look for the living among the dead? Sounds like a harsh critique to these weary, grieving first visitors to the tomb, and maybe it is. I certainly cannot imagine saying it to people who are grieving when I visit their homes and they have not yet removed their loved one's medicine from the shelf in the kitchen, or months later even, disallow a visitor to sit in the chair of the one who has died. The living visit, hoping to both comfort and draw the bereaved out into new life, and yet they sit in the room with the empty chair on which no one has sat for months, with a mantle that displays sympathy cards for the dead amid birthday cards for the living. Why do we look for the living among the dead? And yet we also know that time is important to those who mourn. We cannot dictate how long someone else must mourn, which makes it seem all the more harsh when the angel at the empty tomb greets the women whose beloved friend and Savior is only 3 days dead with, why do you look for the living among the dead? For women who were following a tradition, taking the spices to anoint Jesus' body, as they had likely done with many before Jesus, the angel's question seems ill-timed at best and angel-splaining at worst, suggesting the women don't know what they're doing, a precursor to other accounts when the women tell the men that Jesus has risen, but the men dismiss it as an idle tale. And yet, perhaps, the fact that it startles us to hear it is exactly why Luke includes it in the telling. It is intended to startle the women and all those who hear it for centuries later. Why do we look for the living among the dead? Because we all do it. Kevin Foye, one of our long-term members, who will be doing a farewell and Godspeed service in May as he packs up for Rhode Island. He has a story here about looking for the living among the dead. You could go back.
4. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so Pastor Maria had asked me if I had some stories about looking for the living among the dead, and funnily enough, I do have a couple of stories. And I look around at this great group of people here, and part of my story has to do with, as I look at you, I think it is a miracle we are all here and alive, and I'll explain why that's the case. I actually have two kinds of miracles I wanted to talk about, the exciting kind and the boring kind. And I hope I convince you after my two stories that the boring kind is better. So when I was at a conference a few weeks ago, there was a speaker who came up from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Oh, it's really boring, right? Standards. Why do we have standards? Well, one of the things that National Institute of Standards and Technology does is they investigate catastrophes to find out what went wrong. And in fact, I shared an article with Pastor Marie that was written by a member of NAST, a scientist by the name of Tanya. One of the things that Tanya does right now is to look at that condominium collapse in Surfside, Florida, where many people died. And on that particular day, part of the building fell down. Some people perished, some people didn't. The ones who didn't were kind of saved by miraculous forces. Why did their part of the building not fall down? Why did the other one fall down? But what Tanya is there to find out is why did the part of the building that fell down in the first place, so that we can try to make sure that that doesn't happen again in the future. And that comes to my personal story. So my personal story actually is around an electrician named Doug. And Doug came into my life recently because a few weeks ago I was in the basement and I heard this buzzing sound, and I look up at the ductwork in the basement, and there is arcing from one duct to the other. And that's kind of exciting. So I get the apartment complex people involved, and they're like, doesn't know what they're talking about, wouldn't know an electric arc if they saw one. So a couple of weeks later, Doug shows up finally. Look at that and say, oh yeah, what you have here is a grounding problem. Somebody, in this complex has a problem with their ground and their electric, and hooks up an extra grounding wire, and everything's fine right away because they knew what to do because of standards. The thing is, though, in that situation, there's very little that I could have done about it. It actually turns out it wasn't my power. It shut all the power off, didn't change, still sparking. Needed somebody with a little more expertise to come in and take care of that situation. But because all of these millions of buildings that we have in this country are more or less built the same way, people like Doug are able to do their job and fix the problem relatively quickly. But people like Tanya are the ones who wrote those rules because somebody's house had to burn down for someone to figure out that, hey, we can fix this problem. And people die in fires, but thank God that we're paying attention for these boring miracles of standards writers to look at those tragedies and translate that into standards so that we don't have those tragedies again. I liken the work of Tanya to something that we all do when we're driving down the road. If there's icy conditions and we see a car off, somebody had a little tragedy, we know that we need to slow down, right? We have a miracle learning from other people's examples. So I'll just cap off my story by saying that when everything was opened up in the ceiling, we could see that there was this charred bit of floor joist, and only about half an inch of it was left between it and this massive pile of sawdust left over from construction that had been hidden away in the ducts. Half an inch is separating me from a fire that would have taken out our home. And that was an exciting miracle, but I hope that I convince you that we don't need to rely on that half inch of joist to keep us alive. What we really need is people like Tanya and Doug who are paying attention, learning from tragedies, and so that those dead can teach us how to live.
All right. Thank you. And so I had a paradigm shift when Kevin told me that story. I thought, okay, all right, I'm willing to say goodbye to you, Kevin, while you go to Rhode Island, but thank you for not dying in a fire. We're all aware of what's happening in Ukraine right now. After Bucha, the slaughter that happened there, more soldiers showed up in Mariupol. And Mariupol soldiers changed the strategy of the way they were fighting. They didn't try to wipe out the Russians, the people that came to kill them. They tried to prolong the fight as long as they could so that others could get out of the city and surrounding cities where war was nigh. This was reported by a soldier who had deep wounds but was still fighting, trying to buy time for the living to get out. These soldiers prepared to die so that others might live. Why do we look for the living among the dead? Was said by the angel at the tomb. The version I read says the angel was a he, but it frankly doesn't matter if it's a he, a her, or a they angel. But what we do know in all accounts is the angel had dazzling robes. Maybe this question is not a critique, but an honest question for a modern Christian. Why do we come to church in an era that does not value God? Why do we serve in a homeless shelter and continue to put food in a little food pantry when Jesus even says the poor will be with you always? Why do we pray for peace and have peace vigils out in the cold when the world seems bent on war? Why do we let our dandelions and our lawn grow and keep on working for climate justice when it seems like we have gone too far to be redeemed? We do these things because that's where resurrection shows up. Life always comes from death. God continues to bring new life out of death over and over and over again. That's what God does. Jesus said so. That's what it means to remember every single time we face death and loss, that God starts in places of death and brings life there, time and time again. Anyone who walks through forests, who likes to be out in nature, knows this. We walk along paths made of decaying and dead plants, beside which flowers and trees are blooming because of the decaying and dead plants. Life always comes from death. God makes it so. God brings life out of death time and time again. And lest we forget, God is doing it right now, right here, again.